everyone, and hope you're doing great today. I'm very happy, very glad, excited, delighted, joyful, grateful to welcome you to the fifth edition of the program Roadmap to Organizational Strategy on our great radio station, Amogate Radio Communications. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for the privilege of your presence. Thank you for being with us continually. We are very, very, very glad. I will keep saying you are the reason why we do this. You are the reason we put this together. You are the reason we structure this. You are the reason we focus on this. You are the reason we want to, amplify what you're doing. We want to add value to what you're doing. We want to ensure this, not just the success, but the sustainability of whatever it is that you have put your hands to as an organization, as an institution. And that is why we do this. And so, if we put all of this together and you are not here, then it is almost for nothing. So thank you so much for being here on this beautiful Tuesday, August 13, 2024. Wow. Today we are going to be looking at the How of Strategy Part 2. The How of Strategy Part 2. Last week we looked at the How of Strategy, but today we are going to focus on the resource element in strategy creation. I repeat, the resource element in strategy creation, using time and cost to create favorable and implementable strategies. The resource element in strategy creation, using time and cost to create favorable and implementable strategies. But as is our practice on this program and generally on ARC, before we begin, we are going to try to capture highlights from last week's episode. Last week, we began to look at the how of strategy, and we said some things as we began. One, we said strategy begins with goal setting. Very, very important. Strategy begins with goal setting. Every time we facilitate strategic planning sessions in Amogate and in any other organization that knows what it's doing, strategic planning will often begin with the vision, articulation, and also the vision, if I may use that word, revisitation, right? So anytime you go into a strategic planning session, even if you thought you had a vision, even if your organization has been in existence for 100 years and we've worked in organizations that have existed for decades, sometimes you even have to reinvent the vision, but at the minimum, you will have to revisit the vision. Sometimes you have to look at the vision, especially for those organizations that have been existing for a long time, right? It's important, it's an imperative to revisit the vision and to say, is this still it? Does it need to be revisited? Does it need to be re-articulated? Sometimes the essence of a vision has already been achieved. That's the truth. For an organization like Guinness, for instance, that is over 250 years old, come on, I doubt if the vision 2 centuries and half ago is still the vision as it is now. That would be very atypical. For an organization like Maersk that is 120 years old this year, I wonder if it's in the exact way it was 12 decades ago when it started, right? And we can go on, right? But you get the point. Even if you're 20 years old, even if you're 50 years old, you will have to begin. Every effective strategy creation process would have to begin with either a creation of the vision if you're a new organization, or at the minimum, a revisitation of the vision if you have been existing for a while. And sometimes the revisitation might lead to a reinvention, depending on what is, what the dynamics are, what the current realities are, what the environment of operations looks like, and so on and so forth, right? So strategy always begins with goal setting, and the reason is because if you don't know where you are going, how would you know the best way to get there? We said that last week. Strategy is like a way through a maze. We've been saying that, right? But you have to know where you're going before you can determine the best way of getting there. You cannot find a way until you articulate your destination. Strategy is direction. but you have to first know your destination. Strategy then begins to, what you do with strategy is to try to determine the best direction to arrive at your destination. Very important. So you cannot find a way until you articulate your destination. You finally determine the best direction, the optimal direction. So that was one of the highlights of last week. Number 2, we said as a leader, you must be courageous enough to make appropriate strategic discriminations. Very, very important, non-negotiable. One of the things I want you to note is that strategy is decisiveness, particularly strategic leadership. Strategic leadership requires a lot of decisiveness. Does it require consideration? A lot of it. Comprehensive research, tremendous. We've talked about that. You have to look at trends analysis. You have to look at future projections. You have to look at different dimensions, different projections, different perspectives. In fact, you have to, engage your stakeholders comprehensively, if not exhaustively. But having done all, the reason you are commander-in-chief is to make the decisions. They would make the recommendations, right? When I say commander-in-chief, that's not just as a person, but also as a team, right? Ultimately, the leadership team, which has overall accountability for strategy, has to be decisive, right? You're going to involve your people, extremely important. We've talked about that. But at the end of the day, as a leader, you must be courageous enough to make appropriate strategic discriminations. As a leadership team, you must demonstrate the required leadership courage to make appropriate strategic discriminations. I will continue to recommend my colleague's program, Adepeju Jayoba. She does a fantastic job with leadership competencies, organizational behavior on Amogate Radio Communications every Monday at 12 noon Eastern Time and 5 p.m. West African Time. Please join her and you will learn a lot about the critical leadership competencies that you need. But one of the ones I want to highlight is courage. We highlighted that last week, right? Now, we also, as part of that, we said you must not be afraid to make strategic discriminations in order to ensure strategic prioritizations. I repeat, you must not be afraid and unnecessarily hesitant. You must not prevaricate. Every time I see prevarication, when I see someone who is just unnecessarily prevaricating instead of being decisive, I don't see a leader. Every time I see someone who is unnecessarily prevaricating, I repeat, and that means, to be acting or speaking in an evasive manner, to be indecisive, shifting to the left and shifting to the right, I don't see a leader. You cannot lead strategy if you're necessarily prevaricating, because then you will not be able to take the critical decisions. You will not be able to make the strategic discriminations, right? So we said you must not be afraid to make strategic discriminations in order to, ensure strategic prioritizations, because when you're prioritizing, you are definitely discriminating against certain other possibilities. And I noted here when preparing for this program, I said, I'm going to talk about the expression "it's your call." If you've been in a leadership team, and especially if you are the overall leader of either a particular organization or a particular department, if the buck stops at your table, if you're ultimately accountable, you will probably have heard the expression, "it's your call." At the end of the day, after they've made all the recommendations, after you have gotten all the feedback, after you've done all the analysis, after you've looked at the data, after you've done all the projections, it is still your call. Make the decision, leader. And if you can't make the decision, please get out of the position. Right? You must not be afraid to make strategic discriminations in order to ensure strategic prioritization. That's why it is your call. We also said that strategy must be, continuously evaluated and, where necessary, reinvented based on shifting market conditions. Very, very, very important, right? Strategy must be responsive. Strategy must be dynamic. Strategy cannot be static. And that's why monitoring and evaluation is a critical part of strategy implementation. And that's why we much as we love the core of our DIMA cycle, the core is the DIME, developing, implementing, monitoring, and evaluating strategy. Ultimately, the reason why you're monitoring and evaluating is because of the extension, the R, the reinvention. right? So sometimes the dime has to become the dimer cycle. So when necessary, you must also reinvent strategy. I began with that today, talking about even the need to revisit and, if necessary, or when necessary, to re-envision, right? So you don't just revisit your vision, but you also reinvent your vision. Sometimes even to simply make it more communicable. Sometimes you want to ensure that it's easier for people to catch the vision. Sometimes you have to recouch it. Sometimes you have to simplify it. Sometimes you have to, evaluate how much people really understand what you're doing, how much they know the core of what you're doing, your people, your employees, your critical stakeholders, how much they've caught on to what you're doing, how much they buy into what you're doing, how much they've come to own what you're doing. Sometimes it's all a function of comprehension. And so if the comprehension is not sufficient, you may simply need to take it and break it down and put it in the most communicable manner, right? In the manner that is easiest to understand, right? We also said that the destination must come before the direction. The strategy is direction. The destination must come before the direction, right? When you are setting your strategy, right, you're setting your strategy for your goals. Therefore, there must be strategic clarity. Right? I'm not going to re-emphasize that. We talked about it a lot last week, and I've also spoken to it today. So just take note. I'm going to come back to it in wrapping up shortly, wrapping up this recap very shortly. Now, when the how has come to replace the what, then you cannot get creative with the how. This was something very, 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 very important that we said last week. Sometimes in organizations, the how has come to replace the what. If you're not careful, how we do things has come to replace what we are doing and why we are doing. And therefore, we can't get creative with how. We are stuck on a particular how. And this is part of the reason why strategy cannot be responsive, right? When you don't unlayer, we said last week, you must unlayer processes sometimes to be able to decipher your root organizational intent. What exactly is the organizational? And this is where vision is important. Very, 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 very important. Vision helps you to get back to the root organizational intent, right? Vision ensures that you're not stuck on the how. Now, some hows can be very effective. We're not saying that you should, dismantle what is working. No. You don't dismantle for the sake of dismantling. If it's working and you review and you check the operating environment and things have not changed fundamentally, by all means, please carry on, right? There is an execution part of strategy. There is a follow-through part of strategy and all those things that are very important, especially when we get to the I, right? The implementation part of strategy. We are wrapping up with the part of the D today because that's the foundation. The foundation is the development. However, when you don't know why you're doing things, sometimes you will confuse how you're doing things with why you're doing things, and then you can no longer get creative with the how, right? And we said review both past strengths and future projections is part of the strategy creation process. It's very important to ask yourself, what are the trends? This is where data comes in, and we're going to be doing a lot with data next week. Let me prepare us. We're going to be looking at using technology to enable strategy creation. Right, we're going to be looking at that. We had said it in the very first introductory episode, and we will then be getting to that, right? So it's important, and this is where it's important to understand, the role of data, the role of insights, the role of artificial intelligence. How do we deploy all of these tools, especially to monitor past trends in order to make future projections and let this guide our strategic directions effectively. In conclusion, in concluding the recap of last week, please take note of a framework that we more or less shared with you last week. One, there must be strategic clarity. That's your strategic destination. Very important. Strategic clarity will lead to strategic options. When you know your strategic destination, then you can have a strategic direction. So there was a strategic clarity, that's your strategic direction. This will lead you to strategic, that's your strategic destination. Where are we going? There must be strategic clarity, that's the destination. These will then lead you to strategic options. What are the options? What are the possible ways of getting to where we're going, right? Eventually, this will lead to strategic discrimination of these possible options, of these possibilities, of these different directions, of these different routes. Eventually, you are going to have to say no to some in order to prioritize some, and that comes to the next part of the framework, that is the strategic prioritization. right? And as you prioritize some as a backup plan, as a risk management plan, which must be inherently built into your strategy, you must also have strategic alternatives. So while you're discriminating against some outrightly, there will be against some strategic options outrightly, you are going to make some your strategic alternatives as a form of backup. Remember again, strategic clarity will lead to strategic options will lead to strategic discrimination will lead to strategic prioritization with strategic alternatives as a backup. Wow. Thank you very much again for being here with us. Thank you for following us. Thank you for learning and sharing. We want to now go into the core of today, and that is the resource element, right? The resource element as part of strategy, using time and cost to create favorable and implementable strategies. The resource element, using time and cost to create favorable and implementable strategies. Now, there are three things to note here. One, the ambidexterity factor. In Amogate, you are big on ambidexterity, using your other hand, your typical hand, and your other hand. Some people are naturally left-handed and some people are naturally right-handed. Whichever you are, there is always your typical hand. You're comfortable with it, is your comfort zone, is the easy to do, but there is also the other hand which you must begin to exercise, which you must begin to deploy. Now, please follow me very carefully here. One of the things to note about strategy is that strategy can be very future-oriented. Anytime you're talking about vision, it's not where you are. If you have achieved it already, then you're not talking about vision. You are probably talking about execution excellence. You are probably talking about consolidation and so on and so forth. But essentially, when you're envisioning, you have not been there before. Strategy can be highly future-oriented, right? You're looking at the future. You're looking at future opportunities and future threats, right? Based on your strengths and your weaknesses, based on the things you want to consolidate probably, but it's all future oriented. It's not your typical hand, it's your other hand, it's your unfamiliar hand, it's the uncomfortable hand, it's the hand you haven't proven as much, it's the hand you haven't tested. I just want you to experiment where you are now and try writing with your other hand. Just try. It's not going to be comfortable, right? You've not been there before. That's the reality of strategy, right? You can do all your calculations and all of that, but it's not your typical hand. That is a fact. Now, how do you simultaneously run the business and change the business? Right. I remember we did a program, and for those of you who might want to engage us, Amogate has what we call the AMP program and the APT program. We have the Amogate program for talent that we use for emerging leaders, but we also have the Amogate management program, which is designed for middle-level management, and we do a fantastic job with this. These are things we have proven. All of these, we can curate them specifically for your organization and go deep with your people and give you promise measurable success with it. Now, one of the things we taught when we were on that AMP program, we taught the principle of running your business versus changing your business, and we learned this from someone who had some scholars who had worked, who had created that. This was not original to us, but we used the article, we shared it. How do you run the business versus changing the business, right? While you are articulating that envisioned future, how do you, quote unquote, survive in the now? While you are trying to change the business, while you're trying to arrive at a strategic destination, how do you manage the now? This is where the resource element comes in. The resource element is a strategic decision. Resource, the management of resources, the allocation of resources must be strategically driven. Very, very important. Otherwise, you don't have a strategy. Your strategy must include, in creating that strategy, you must think about how do we use time and cost to create frameworks. Time, because time is a resource. I don't know if you know, it is a resource, and so is money, right? And so are people, and so is technology, and so are relationships, right? There's so many resources, right? But we want to look at time and cost specifically. How do you use time and cost to create favorable and implementable strategies? Number one, you need to be able to differentiate between the immediate, the intermediate, and the ultimate. I repeat, you need to be able to differentiate between the immediate, the intermediate, and the ultimate. Typically, the ultimate is your long-term vision. This is where we're going. This is what we're trying to achieve. Typically, is not probably less than 25 years or 20 years. Many times, true visions, remember, we've talked a lot about this in previous programs. They are compelling, they are gargantuan. They are not going to provide immediate value. That's the truth. They are not very likely to provide immediate value. So your long-term goals, you talk about long-term goals, they can be very much in the level of ultimate, in the realm of ultimate. Now, of course, there's the intermediate. Maybe that's 10 years. If you stick at it, if you're likely to get here in 10 years' time. And then there's the immediate. You have, in the midst of all of this, you have you have the immediate needs to attend to. You have cost, you have bills, and how do you cope in the immediate? So when you are allocating, or when you're deciding how to use time and cost to create favorable and implementable strategies, you must first differentiate between the immediate, the intermediate, and the ultimate. Very important. Of course, the immediate, those are things that you have to look at and say, okay, these immediate things must still be leading to the ultimate. The intermediate must also be leading to the ultimate. This is where organizations miss it sometimes. Sometimes in the quote unquote so-called pressure to meet the immediate needs, we disconnect from the ultimate. Please follow me carefully. Whether as an organization, whether as a department, whether as a unit, leadership requires resilience. It takes the resilience necessary and the grit required to keep the immediate and the intermediate consistently aligned with the ultimate, so that you're not deviating. Otherwise, you will find out that there's something called the illusion of time. And what do I mean by that? You will think you have a lot of time before you blink 20 years have arrived. And if you're not careful, you are so disconnected from the ultimate in the so-called pressure to meet the immediate, that you would arrive at the ultimate at the next 20-25 years, and you will suddenly realize that you haven't achieved your strategic goals, and your competitors that stayed on course are way ahead of you. I remembered something here. I remembered an organization, that was Maersk. This was about 2 decades ago. I remember learning about lost leadership, right? Maersk, for those who don't know, AP Moller Maersk, and particularly Maersk shipping line, is you probably see a Blue Star container anywhere in the world. You see a Blue Star container, that's Maersk. Maersk is a Danish company. Part of their strategy at the point was lost leadership. And what was lost leadership for them? They would deliberately lose in the immediate to corner the market. And once they have cornered the market and demonstrated their value, they can now, reposition themselves cost-wise. That was part of the strategy. Now, remember, today's topic is looking at using time and cost to create favorable and implementable strategies. And one of the things we do on Amogate is we can be very pragmatic, right? We can be very strategic, but we can simultaneously in fact, are always simultaneously highly pragmatic. And that's why the rider to today's program is using time and cost to create favorable but also implementable strategies. So you want to ask yourself, how do we position our organizations for strategy which can be futuristic while sustaining the present, especially if we are in an environment where you may not necessarily be able to, easily access either investment funds or, credits that is easy to pay back, that is convenient and easy to pay back. Very important. You'll be saying, yes, Tolu, I've heard you. It's easy for Maersk to do lost leadership. They're in Denmark. It's easy for Facebook to do this. They're in America. They can easily raise the funds. I was reading an article in the last couple of days, and I was reading that investors do not have sufficient new businesses to invest in. So to say, can you imagine, there is a lot of money, but there are not enough new businesses, right? Somebody may be listening to me in another part of the world and saying, no, that's not my reality here. Here, I have a great idea. Here, I have proven research, demonstrable research, evidence-backed insights, and I'm still finding it challenging to access investors' funds or to access the kind of credit that can support me. How then can I manage this time and cost element to ensure that I still have favorable and implementable strategies? I've heard you, Tolu. I must stay aligned with the ultimate. My immediate and intermediate must remain continuously aligned with the ultimate, so that I can arrive at the envisioned future. But how do I manage the immediate, right, and the intermediate? Now, one of the things I still want to talk about, I'm telling you the truth, it may be something we keep emphasizing, but it is still the reality, is strategic prioritization. Very, very, very important. When you're using your other hand and your typical hand, one of the things you have to understand is that, your typical hand has gotten used to a lot of conveniences. And if you're not careful, when your other hand comes, it's almost as if you can never use it to write. But wait till you have a broken arm. I once had a broken arm. I remember, I think I must have been about 10 or I can't remember exactly, and I had a fractured hand. And I had to learn to use my other hand. And it worked for that period. Did I revert to my comfort zone after my cast was taken off? Oh, definitely. But I'm trying to say that this is where innovation also comes in. We talk a lot about innovation. We're big on innovation. And that's why we keep saying separate the what from the how. When you're prioritizing resources to ensure that alignment with the ultimate, while in the immediate and the intermediate, your other hand is going to be saying, oh, no, I can't do without this. But it's not always true. That's why we keep asking for strategy reviews. You have to step away from your comfort zone. You have to step away from the immediate. You have to step away from what you always do. If you do not examine your assumptions fundamentally, you would not know that your how has come to replace your what and why, because it's your comfort zone. The goal is not to use your typical hand. For instance, I'm right-handed. The goal is not to use my right hand. The goal is to write, right? The goal is not to use my RIGHT right hand. The goal is to simply write, WRITE. And this was many, many years ago, right? This was almost 30 years ago, about 30 years ago. Today, I don't even need to use a hand. I can simply use my voice to type, can't I? The goal is to document. So we really must learn to examine our underlying assumptions, especially when it comes to, balancing that time and cost element. The cost element, what are we trying to achieve? How do we stay focused? What is the goal? Until that why and the what is, continuously and thoroughly examined, we cannot get creative and therefore efficient with the allocation of resources. And if we're not careful, we will think that there is not enough, but there can actually be more than enough. We just need to there can be more than enough to stay on course with the ultimate. We just need to re-examine our assumptions. We need to look at our underlying assumptions. We need to shake up those assumptions. And that's why, look, I will keep telling you, please, if you're listening to me today, invite us to work with you. Sometimes you need a third eye. I wrote an article, not a long article, a very simple write-up. Yesterday was National Middle Day Child in America, and I was celebrating my colleague, Dr. Titilola Ogunshono, who does a fantastic job with core issues in economic development. Please join her every Friday at 12 noon Eastern and 5 p.m. Watt. And because I had written it in my mind, and if you're not careful, you think you're seeing your mistakes or you're not really seeing them. And someone was saying, oh, you had a typographical error here. And I said, no. And I went back to it and she had to point it out, because that's the third eye. No matter how good you think you are, when it comes to examining your underlying assumptions, you need the third eye. You need another perspective. Please let us work with you on on examining those underlying assumptions, so that you can truly innovate. And that way you will continue to free up resources to ensure a strategic alignment between your immediate, your intermediate, and your ultimate. Otherwise, you will be deviating from your ultimate, even where you think you have all the resources, even in nations where you think they have all the resources. Look, the truth is that my colleague Titilola Ogunshono will be quick to tell you that resources can be very finite. She's an economist. When she takes on her strengths as an economist, she'll begin to tell you how there will always be limited resources from the perspective of an economist compared to the wants and needs, right? But I will tell you as a strategist that the moment you can re-examine your aligned assumptions, you will be able to, free up resources, and what does not look enough may suddenly, at least provide you some flexibility to stay on course with your strategic destination, because you have ensured that you can, manage the cost and time element to create favorable and implementable strategies. Very, very important. Once again, if all of this is sounding a little bit, nebulous, remember we had already one strategy can be a very conceptual exercise, particularly the development aspect of strategy. We are looking at developing strategy. We've looked at the what of strategy in the previous episode, and we have now looked at the how of strategy, practical ways, set your goal, but also learn to look at your immediate and intermediate to ensure that they are aligned with your ultimate. Now, ultimately, when you arrive at the envisioned future, when you get to that ultimate point, typically you would have consolidated a number of things enough for you to have, for instance, one of the things that comes with arriving at the ultimate is a strong brand. If you have done a good job by staying on course with the immediate and the intermediate, by the time you arrive at the ultimate, many times your brand is already has created a lot of value for you, right? Your brand has positioned you in the market. Your brand, commands certain things already. But what do you do while you're building that brand? What do you do while you're attaining that visibility? Remember, try to make sure that you are being very efficient with the allocation of resources in order to ensure that the immediate and the intermediate stay aligned, strategically aligned with the ultimate. Very, very, very important. Otherwise, you would think you have a lot of time and you will suddenly arrive at the future and you may see that those who stayed on course have gained a lot of strategic advantage over you as an organization, and you may very well be out of your way, be on your way out of the market, right? Well, it's at this point that I think we're going to draw a curtain on today's edition of the program because of the resource we've been talking about. That's time. Thank you very, very much for doing this with us. Remember, we try to look at the resource elements using time and cost to create favorable and implementable strategies, and we try to enjoin you to please ensure that you identify what is the immediate. Yes, you have to meet those immediate needs, but you have to ensure that the immediate and the intermediate remains strategically connected to the ultimate, the goals you have defined. We've already talked about the need to begin with your strategic destination and all those other things we talked about last week and also recap this week, right? That ultimate destination must remain connected with the intermediate and the immediate so that you can arrive at those goals, and you can do that through a lot of strategic resource allocation. Thank you so much for doing this with us. Thank you for being here with us. Thank you for learning along with us. Please share. We do this every Tuesday. My program is every Tuesday, but we have great programs for you Mondays through Fridays. My colleague Abiodun Abari tomorrow will be talking about sports and the geopolitical economy. We're bringing fantastic and highly usable strategies, honestly, that you need to be aware of as a brand. I talked about brand, and you will learn a lot about how to leverage all those things, brand value that comes with sports. The Olympics just finished. There's so much is going to be dismantling and deciphering and helping you to unpack, so that it's not just watching the games for you and enjoying the entertainment, but actually understanding what to take from this as you consolidate your brand and you build your business in the geopolitical economy. Thank you very much again for doing this with us. My name remains Tolo Modera. We'll be back same time, same station next week by God's grace. Until then, please follow us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, follow us on LinkedIn, share the word. We are also uploading all of this on YouTube. Check out, subscribe to our ACK page, Amoget Radio Communications. We have all our previous programs from previous quarters. They're currently more and more are currently being uploaded. Just subscribe to ACK and then check us out on YouTube, Amoget Radio Communications, and you'll be automatically notified as new episodes are being uploaded. There's so much resources. My colleague Adequaji likes to say they are there for you and they're free. There's so much that you have to learn that we give very passionately and, trust me, very expertly and effectively. Thank you very much again. We'll be back same time, same station next week. Until then, take care of yourself and remember to think strategic allocation of resources to maintain an alignment between the immediate, intermediate, in order to ensure you arrive eventually at the ultimate. Thank you so much and have a good one.